Transition, the process of change from one condition to another.
We are now at a new crossroad where change is evident once again.
What does not serve us must transform us anew.
Returning to our original state of oneness and true nature of that which created who we truly are.
Confusion was the way of the past. Enlightenment is the way of the now and future, shedding away the layers of deceit.
We now bring you the transformation of the two who started as one. Our fearless planet never stands still.
Earth has been in a process of transition, and we are not exempt from this remarkable ongoing reality.
Well, hello and welcome to Transition Radio's Real Talk with the Cummings. My name's Mark Angelo.
And I'm Lynna Ariel. Thank you guys for joining us. We have again, wonderful guest,
Riley Grace. She's here joining us. We're gonna, just see what she's been up to since we last interviewed her, and we've got something in common now. We both kind of had our little encounter with an individual by the name of Mars, who has a podcast here on YouTube called TransBruh. And so we're going to kind of share notes and talk a little bit about our experience. I'm interested to hear, we watched the entire event because it was quite the event, and kind of it made me feel like really good to see, whoa, it's not
just us.
It's not just us. This is the way he operates when people don't agree with him. So welcome, Riley. How have you been since we last interviewed you?
Oh, Lord. Well, Mark, Lynna, thank you both for having me. It's wonderful to be back on the show. And a lot has happened in my life. Just talking about law school in general. I literally just finished my second to last exam today, just about an hour or so before coming on the show. So I feel wonderful about that. Lots of weight off my shoulders, but go a little easy on me because I'm still kind of recovering from having to deal with that, legal professionalism and ethics, wonderfully riveting stuff. So I'm finishing up my first year at law school, which it feels crazy to say that. I have one more exam Monday and then I am done. I can officially say I'm finished with my first year. I am getting ready to work for the summer. I'm going to be working two jobs. One, I'm going to be working in the organized crime division at the Maryland Attorney General's office. And I'm going to be doing research for the Dean of Diversity and Inclusion here at the law school, which is all wonderful, very excited. And then related to my channel, it's actually seen a decent amount of growth. I'm very kind of proud of how it's done, right? It's really amazing to me that this started out as something which was fundamentally sort of a coping mechanism, right? A platform where I could talk about things, my experiences with people, and be able to share my experiences with people who could sort of get what I was going through, right? In a way where I could not really talk, in a way that I couldn't over at the law school or in the state where I had, just moved to and I didn't really know anyone. So it's cool to see that, I'm starting to get growth, and it's cool to see, I'm excited for where things will go from here.
That's awesome. And when you do something out of passion and with heart, I always believe that I'll say build it and they will come, that kind of thing. And it's
I've heard that.
Yeah. And I think it's an amazing thing when you start something off as a hobby and you start seeing it grow because you're really putting love. And that's what everything's all about, love and passion and things of that nature.
I wanted to ask you, how have you been coping with everything, with the current situation that the country's in? How does school work into your schedule now? Are you remote, off in your dorm doing things, or is it still classroom settings?
So the way that we run things right now is we have a remote administration for all my classes, right? It's been very challenging for a lot of people. I do have friends at my law school who I talk to a lot of, some of which may be watching right now. So hello, if you are. What's up, Rachel? But in any case, I know that it's been very challenging on a lot of my peers, right? I know that a lot of my peers are not used to this degree of isolation and working from home on a computer almost exclusively, right? A lot of people have families to deal with, right? Like the other day, my professor was leading a lecture and her kid came onto the screen, right? Because like she lives in a small house and like she has families and toddlers are gonna go where they do, right? And there's just some things which are hard to plan for when you live at home with a family or a spouse or whoever, right? Especially if you come from places of economic poverty or depression, or you're dealing with some of the negative economic aspects of the coronavirus, or if you have the coronavirus, right? So some people have been hurt a lot more than others. What our school did was we moved for the semester to just a straight pass-fail system. So while I feel like I did, like I feel very confident in all my exams, right? Like I feel like I knocked them out of the park. But the school is also sort of just like taking it across the board, equalizing everything. So that way, if people do come from these harder backgrounds, right, where it is substantively harder for people to study or to succeed, then the school doesn't want to punish them just because they come from those backgrounds, right? Which I think is the right way for them to have gone about this.
Yeah, it's challenging times indeed, that we're living in. But I think that this is a time where we could show our true colors and shine and really be a light to the world, in my humble opinion,
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of biblical stuff, makes you really, I know that last time we interviewed you, we were talking about religious beliefs and, we kind of had a lot of differences, but I truly believe that in the end, when you believe in a higher power, and there's many different ways of believing in a higher power, but when you're facing the times that you're facing now and seeing a lot of the prophecies that are biblical come to volition, it kind of makes you go,
So again, I don't, I tend not to proselytize. I tend not to look, I mean, like that's an interesting analysis, sort of looking at a lot of the events that have happened through a biblical or a religious lens, right? Whether or not you ascribe a particularly religious lens to that, I'm not sure if it changes the calculus, at least morally, too much, right? Like whether or not it's this happens, so we should come together under God, or this happens, so we should come together as a human race, right? Like the material effect is still the same, right? Like it's a realization as a race that now is a time to sort of recognize the material, like some of the material inequalities or deficiencies with the way that we do society right now, and to start moving forward with a sort of a renewed lens of accounting for the well-being of one another.
Very important, and to really put in perspective what really matters and what does not, because we've lived in a world that's about building your bank account versus building your spirit, and whatever anyone wants to believe, whatever their religious belief or spiritual belief is, I think now's the time to like really cleanse ourselves, take note, no matter what we've done in our lives, and really focus on building that spiritual essence of us, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. No, and I definitely get that. And as I expressed sort of in our talk before, right, I take a pretty broad view of what it means to be in spiritual development, right? Like even if someone, like let's say for an example, someone who ends up defining themselves as atheist, right? I see that as a type of spiritual growth, because you can't normally just define yourself into an atheist category without engaging with religious ideas, right? It's just sort of coming to a negative conclusion, not negative in like a moral way, just like the absence of affirmation, right? You have to engage with spiritual ideas in order to come to that sort of a conclusion or personal worldview, right? And so I see a lot of people right now going through different types of spiritual growth, right? Whether it's finding sort of a love for the world through something like Christ, or finding meaning in the world, or some type of meaning through some other religious lens, right? Like a lot of people are going through, it's a very intense moment of spiritual growth and development. Sometimes not in the greatest way. Like there was the pastor, I don't know if you saw the news, the one that tried to blow away the coronavirus, right? That was all over the news. Said, "Be gone," right? I'm not sure how constructive or useful that is to society. But like, I know that the organization that I worked with before I came to law school, the homeless outreach organization, they are religious, right? And they're non-denominational, and they've had a really deep and spiritual growth during this time, right? Because they've been overwhelmed with the amount of people that come to them, but they've also been overwhelmed with the amount of support that they've gotten, right? Which has kind of shown them that, you know, when times get tough like this, we are able to sort of come together as a species. And you know, for all the different lenses that the people who work there operate through, it's a very common thread of kind of coming together as humans, right? At the end of it.
Well, I just wanted to say before we start that what you did in that interview with TransBruh was, I mean, absolutely, unbelievably, stupendously, enormously awesome. I mean, what you did was like, there's a kid playing in the kiddie pool, and you should stay in the kiddie pool because the deep end is for swimmers only. That's how it felt, really. Yeah. In all aspects of your interview with him, it was just like this massive takedown of a person who cannot construct two thoughts together and not even answer an objective question that is basically yes or no. Did the person with the candy not want that person to have it? Or I was like,
I want you to repeat that because I'm like, God, this guy has no ability to go with things. You know, it's like, okay, this will be challenging, but let's
go into the hypothetical.
So can you repeat that hypothetical? Because I thought it was.
Yeah, the hypothetical. It was very simple. And actually there's like, I was planning to make a video talking about like why I did certain things, but we can talk a little bit about that now. So the hypothetical essentially went like this, right? You have two children, A and B, who go to an ice cream shop. When they get to the ice cream shop, the mom looks at both of them and is like, here, I'm going to give you $5 each, and you can go up to the ice cream stand and order on your own, and I'm going to let you do, you know, order whatever ice cream that you want, right? And once they get up there, sorry, someone commented something. I need to address that in a second, maybe. But anyway, once they get up to the ice cream stand, child A plans on ordering vanilla ice cream, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, child A is like a basic kid, but like, you know, if you like vanilla ice cream, it's fine. Like, that's all good and well and dandy and so on. Child B leans over and just asks child A, hey, have you ever tried strawberry ice cream? It's pretty good. Child A heard this and sprinted back towards his mom crying. And once he got there, the mom asked child A, well, hey, child A, why are you crying? Why are you crying so much? And child A says that child B was trying to force child A to eat strawberry ice cream. I can also hear a little bit of feedback.
You know, there are individuals in life who create their monsters underneath their bed. And they create bad things where bad things aren't there. The inability to cope with somebody telling him, hey, you should try strawberries sometimes. It's pretty good. In his mind, he heard
gets all defensive,
which happens a lot with people that have had childhood traumas that can't cope with things. And all he heard was, you should eat strawberry ice cream.
Yeah. And that's sort of the point of bringing it up, right? Again, I can hear a little bit of feedback if you could, just because I keep noticing that. But that was sort of the point of the hypothetical, right? Because that's something that Ariel Scarcella did during her video, which was something that I was trying to tease out. Now, you know, it's a lot harder to get him to sort of admit that Ariel is lying, right? Like, I couldn't just ask him, so you agree with me that Ariel lied, right? Like, he would never admit that. So I have to sort of walk him down logically the steps to come to that conclusion, right? So that when we get to the ultimate conclusion, it doesn't matter whether or not he actually agrees with it. Like, all the evidence is on the table. And yeah, this is the exact kind of situation where in the video with Ariel Scarcella, right? She made one of the claims that she made was to the effect of people call her transphobic for having certain gender preferences. And she cited 2 examples, right? And then if you actually, like, the funny thing is, if you actually go and you watch either of those videos, not only do the people in neither video say anything to that effect, but they go out of their way to say the opposite, right? Which is like exactly what happens in the hypothetical. Someone tells this person one thing and they go off crying, saying that they said something else, right? And this is clearly dishonest, right? Like, it's not hard to put that together. But I knew, like, I shouldn't say I knew. I had a strong suspicion going in that he was going to try and fight that he was going to try and dodge the question or beat around it or whatever. So first I asked the reason why I asked this hypothetical, or one of the reasons at the beginning, was to just at least get him to acknowledge that people can be dishonest for misrepresenting what someone else says blatantly. Right. But also like another practical reason that I asked that question, and this is actually something sort of in response to some criticisms that I've had. Some people say, now actually it's funny because I've heard both sides of this. Some people said that I went like way too easy on him, and I'm not sure if I agree with that. I mean, like in some respects I probably did, but some people thought that there were certain questions I asked in such a way as to that were a little controlling, right? And that kind of hurt me because the reason why, like this is pretty standard debate stuff, right? Mm-hmm. That conversation could have gone over one of two ways, to be clear. In one scenario, it went over sort of the way that it did, where he refused to answer any question during the entirety of the time directly. So I did have to ask questions which were more closely tied and which more invited a very specific answer, because he was doing everything that he could to sort of get out of them. But the questions I asked sort of at the onset, during sort of like the preliminary part, like before the debate had even formally begun, a lot of those questions I was just asking to see if I could get him to agree with me on basic things that no one should disagree on, right? Like the fact that we should be able to engage in a debate in good faith, and that if you're presented with evidence that proves your point wrong, that you should just acknowledge that you're wrong. That's not something that should be a matter of debate. That's just as, like, literally that's as simple as just acknowledging that if you say that 2 + 2 is 5, and I point out, hey, it's actually 4, that you just like agree with that. It's not like a disputed type of issue. And the same thing with the hypothetical. I wrote it very clearly to invite a very specific answer so that I could at least see if it was possible for him to agree with a certain point of view at all. And the fact that he went out of his way to avoid answering the question kind of showed me at the onset what the tone of the entire conversation was going to be like.
Because he didn't come into the conversation with trust, and he's always has the attitude that someone's out to get him. And that's, with a lot of people in the world, and blame it on the way they're raised, blame it on trauma, whatever. And to have that kind of attitude, those are the people that will probably look at you and say that you're controlling, because it's about them. It's not about you. It's about them, because they're not able to engage in a conversation that doesn't fit that neat little box that's in their head. So like the kid with the ice cream, he saw that other kid was forcing him to eat strawberry. He saw that as a controlling situation when it was not. It was like the other kid going, hey, man, you should step out of your little safe box and try something else. And so I would have been totally frustrated, because I knew exactly what you were doing, how you were setting the stage so that, people could understand, the audience could understand what you were trying to do. And so he could go, there's something here. But he wouldn't even allow that.
But that's not unlike what we see every afternoon from our now president. I mean, he does it to the reporters. It's the same exact mindset and paradigm that he's pulling from in order to, paint himself as the one who knows and the others as fake news or whatever they want.
Or you'll never make it. You're a terrible reporter. And it's like, does that make that that person better because you're putting somebody else down?
Or there were times when they were telling, he was telling you to calm down, and it's nothing different than what Trump does when he gets bothered by someone's questioning, and he's like, settle down, and you need to calm down. And it's like, the person's not even, emotional.
Yeah, it's actually particularly interesting when he did that, because I mean, like, you can go back and you can watch. I don't have to just say this and expect you to trust it. Like, the evidence is out there. Like, that was clearly an example of projection, right? Like, I've gone back and I've watched it because, like, I take criticism seriously, and I was wondering, like, okay, did I ever get like angry? And it's like, no, I literally just enjoyed myself the entire time, because like I enjoy debating, and honestly, it was not that difficult.
That's a typical narcissistic characteristic, that they will get you to believe that you are the problem, when in reality, it is them that are getting triggered. It's them that was raising the voice, because he kept raising his voice at you and had this really horrible attitude all the way through. And I want to take this time to thank Janae, because Janae was the one that sent me the link on Instagram. And then I went ahead and I watched the entire interview. And I was like, goodness, you know, it was just
And the funny thing is, it ended the same way ours did.
yeah,
By pulling the plug. Or even earlier on,
yeah.
he said that his computer crashed, and that it never happened before.
Yeah.
It was probably because he couldn't handle what you were saying, and he was just kind of losing it. You know?
I mean, like that very well could be fair. And there was also, I went back and I rewatched it because I just happened to notice he was streaming on his channel as well, and he happened to cut out as soon as I brought up the fact that Ariel self-identified as a turf in the video. Like he just happened to turn off his stream at that point. And you know, we can speculate about why that is. And I had like a fleeting moment where I thought, all right, do I want to ask about that? Do I want to press him on that? But ultimately, like, it's not like I have any proof conclusively about like the reason why he did or whether or not he told the truth. That's one of those things where it's like, okay, maybe it'll be fine to speculate about that later on in a forum such as this. But I wasn't going to make it something to talk about there, because that would give them like the thing is, when you ask people about these certain things, which you cannot nail them on, they'll use it as an opportunity to sort of meander on the point and get away from what you were originally talking about. I really wanted to nail him about the aspect. I can hear some feedback by the way. I really wanted to nail him about the fact that Ariel self-identified as a TERF, right? Like, that is damning evidence that she's being transphobic, like explicit. Like, it is as hard as hell to get over, you know, like, in order, like, if you want to sell me that if I self-identify as a TERF that's not transphobic, it's like, okay, dude, sure, yeah, you just don't know what that word means whatsoever. So that's the point I really wanted to focus on. If I went down that road of, hey, why did you turn off your stream? Then that would give him the opportunity to be like, oh, it's because I experienced some technical issues, or, you know, he would give me like reasons X, Y, and Z. He might even have something prepared. And I'm not going to get bogged down in that, because that detracts away from the main point, which is like the meat and bones of what I want to get into, right? Yeah. So it's one of those like small rhetorical things where maybe he intended it, maybe he didn't. Either way, it didn't really matter to me. I wasn't going to acknowledge it.
Well, he kept threatening throughout, and like he threatened with our interview.
I think we're done.
I think we're done. I don't have time for this anymore. And it's like a typical runaway. When an individual cannot handle a situation, that's the first sign they do. And I'm very analytical and very based on psychiatry, because that's, you know, a lot of my background. So right away, I see the points. When someone can't deal with something, they threaten to leave. They threaten to hang up on you, or they hang up on you, as he did with you in the end. And he like kicked us out of the stream.
Yeah, but he had no problem with Fiona Lander. I mean, basically just let her go off for 3.5 hours, and they enjoyed themselves having a conversation. So it's all, you know, semantics and things.
I'm not familiar. Who is that? What's the, you're referencing someone else?
One is a person who says that trans women are men and wears this shirt called TWAM. And she's a young British trans woman who identifies as a male, but, you know, still wears her feminine, you know, essence and stuff like that, but still, you know, she's on the side of like, who's the other? Who's the other person? Biology. Who's the other person? Rose of Dawn, and
gotcha.
the older trans woman over there in Britain, forget her name. But they're on the side of TERFs, right? So they're basically kind of used by TERFs in order to, you know, kind of justify what they have to say about trans women.
And I think it's funny because they all bases biology, like this holy grail, and they don't even understand biology. They're using biology as a science, which they don't even understand or respect, for that matter. You brought in a lot of science and a lot of links. He didn't even want to look at it. Like you said, we could end this discussion right now if we both look at this and discuss it like two adults, two professional debaters. But oh no, he just like now.
Like, do you have any sources? Do you have a doctor? And then, you know, do you have a PhD? Do you have a degree? Why are you saying what you're saying? How do you feel? And then you're like,
and then he got defensive.
Yeah,
right away.
Very
defensive. Let me take the time to thank everyone that's on the chat right now. We got Dylan, Marcy, Perpetual Annoyance, and Janae Rose, and Brianka, and Cube87. Thank you all for tuning in and being part of this interview. So yeah, let me see. I think Janae Rose said, Buck Angel told me that there's men trying to insert themselves in the lesbian community, and that's why Ariel is doing what she's doing. I asked him, where's this happening? He just said everywhere. That's, that really blows my mind. Because Buck Angel's been around for a long time. Not for the right reasons that he's been part. I mean, and I have nothing against what people do for a living, but, for him to say that.
Well, it depends on what he means, right? When I hear that, when you talk about, all right, so like just dissecting the sentence, right? Men are trying to insert themselves into the lesbian community. I can immediately sort of take that in one of two ways. Either like you think of men, like people who identify as men, people who are like cis straight men who try to like convert lesbians away from being lesbians. That's sort of my like one understanding. I suppose that's like a more charitable, a good faith interpretation of that. But generally when I hear that sort of rhetoric being used, it's talking about trans women and trans women who are lesbians and who identify as lesbians and who are validly part of the lesbian community, right? And when you start talking about that, like that's an issue because you're not only misgendering trans women just categorically as men, like not only are you just doing that on a categorical basis, but you're also calling for them to be negatively treated on the basis of that categorization, right? So there's all sorts of stuff wrong with that, right? Like it's all kinds of terrible.
Yeah, and he's a trans man himself, and
yeah,
I've done terrible things in the past, and dealing with my own transphobia and dealing with my own self-hatred and trying to battle, and no excuses, and we all make mistakes and we grow and we understand what we've done. But what a lot of these individuals don't get is that doing what they're doing is just giving ammunition to those people that hate us. And it's like people are being targeted more so now than ever because of what's taking place. It's just when people were starting to understand the trans community. Now people are like, there's a lot more murders. People are, past couple of days, that's all I've heard. Somebody in Colombia had their eyes gouged out. 2 women in Puerto Rico just got burned alive in their car.
There's a trans woman in Baltimore just, I think, within the past couple weeks. So, yeah, no, believe me, I am quite aware. There's a reason I don't leave my apartment that much, aside from the coronavirus. Very acutely aware. Yeah. And no, I agree with you. And it's hard for me because I look at a lot of these people, right? So like Rosa Dawn, Blair White, TransBruh, right? I look at a lot of them and really I could see sort of one of two interpretations of their sort of actions, right? In the first interpretation, and this is probably where I see someone like Blair White more, just because there's a larger financial incentive, like people who realize that there's sort of a market for having what are effectively tokens, right? Like token trans minorities to validate the opinions of people who are objectively transphobic, right? So those people who are transphobic can retain their beliefs and still think that they are morally justified in having them, right? And so like I see a lot of like, for example, I'm very suspicious that this is the position that Blair White takes because like she's at such a, like she makes so much money off of YouTube and she's come under so much criticism. Like it would take such an insurmountable amount of ego for her to not ever even conceptualize or realize the harm that she does to the trans community, right? Like I am very suspicious that she actually genuinely acts in any reasonable degree of good faith. When we are talking about someone who's a little smaller and a little younger, right? So like Calvin Gara, for example, I like even though he does have a bit more of a platform, it's hard for me to say whether or not he is just acting out of financial incentive. He's a bit younger. He might just be like a really confused kid. Sort of the same thing with like TransBruh or Mars or whatever you want to call him, right? It's hard for me to tell whether or not they are people who are operating with, you know, just out of like a financial incentive where they realize that there's this market, this very profitable market on social media to have trans people, especially like binary trans people, who are able to justify the bigoted beliefs of trans folks, right? It's hard for me to tell if they're just trying to get into that market or if they actually genuinely believe the things that they say. It's always harder for me to believe the latter because like when you start believing that, it is conceptually harder for me to see someone take that sort of a position and still like be able to maintain that in the same conceptual space as also identifying as trans, right? Because what you're doing is several different things. Either you're just acknowledging that no matter what you do, that you'll always identify with a label that you do not want or you do not identify with, or B, that even if you do identify with that label, that you have to meet a certain threshold level of passability or surgery or whatever it be in order to get there. And that seems really dangerous, because what if someone just happens to clock you, even though you put in like all the work that you can? Like, I think about myself, right? Like, I put in a lot of work to pass and I put in a lot to transition, but like it still happens every now and again where I'm clocked. Does that mean that I'm not quote unquote a woman just by virtue of the fact that even despite my best efforts, I don't pass perfectly or pass all the time or pass like 100% of the time? I'd like to think not, because that kind of puts me in a catastrophized position, because if that's the case, then there's nothing I can do, even under these people's definition, to be able to be considered authentically a woman, right? And they're just on the precipice. They just happen to pass, so it's a lot easier for them to identify with that. But that's something which could be taken away if they ever come off their medication, or they don't get the surgeries they need, or what have you. It just seems like such a fragile worldview, even when you look at it from like their perspective.
Well, I think it stems a lot from hatred, self-hatred. And so by them doing that, it kind of, makes them feel like they're okay with those outside of the community that are picking or hating on trans individuals or individuals in the LGBT community, because there's a lot of phobia. So I don't even like to use that phobia. Self-hatred, not finding yourself to be okay with who you are. So by doing that, it kind of like buffers certain things. And I find, I know Blair makes a lot of money. I don't think Mars makes money with what he's doing, because he doesn't have that many subscribers. It's just some sort of like, maybe from the religious upbringing, that can make you kind of fight who you are. And by doing, you create that kind of content and views. I know that's why it was happening to me. There was a lot of internal battles. Mm. And so that's why I did what I did. But once you deal with your battles and once you face your own demons, then you're like, you know what? Everyone's entitled to live.
Isn't this part of a larger, and I'm just throwing this out there, Riley, doesn't this look like it's part of a larger, more of a ultra conservative, alt-right type movement, where it's trying to pit those that hate trans people or are very discriminatory against us to pander to their electorate, and to be able to get their constituents to vote for them in the future? And people like Blair White or people like Mars and stuff, they're doing more of a disservice to their own like trans community than anything else. But they are serving a greater purpose towards the alt-right movement, and those that would be more apt to be bent towards ultra conservatism.
So I have to, all right. Yeah. I definitely have thoughts. I'm still pulling my mind out of the goop from test taking earlier, but I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. But anyway, to respond from an objective standpoint, I tend to agree. When you have, like right now, trans is being trans and trans identity is unfortunately something which is highly, highly politicized. I wish it wasn't. I wish I could just go about my life and just like have this not be a political issue, but here we are. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate that it's, at this point, been largely drawn along party lines, right? Like you do not see barely any representation of trans people among the Republican Party, especially among the alt-right. And I think that people who are Republicans sort of realize this, right? Like when you are on the far right, I think that strategically people will eventually realize, like, mind you, there's a lot of people who are conservative who do not think a lot about like strategy or their worldview or whatever, but there are a lot of people on there who do, and who recognize that if you want to win, then what you need to do is you need to be as persuasive as you can to the average person. And the way that you do that, because you generally have your constituency, right? Like you have the people who already sort of pre-identify with your party or your ideology or whatever. Like those are people you don't have to worry about. But people who you do want to be able to convince are people in the groups that you're talking about, because it's a lot easier politically to talk about a certain subject when you have someone saying the things from that identified group, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Blair White is like the perfect token poster child for the conservative movement, because what you have is someone who is trans and who is like noticeably transgender, but who has like a couple, I'll say like 3 things going for her, right? First, she passes wonderfully. Secondly, she's also attractive by like a lot of conventional standards. I'm not going to say whether or not you or I or anyone finds her attractive, but she has a lot of content out there and a lot of it's marketed towards thirsty guys, right? Primarily. I'm just going to make that hard assumption. And then third, right, she says the things that conservatives want to say, but who are afraid to say it because they're afraid that they will be marked as transphobic or bigoted or some combination. But when you have someone who is of that group saying it, I mean, this is literally what Blair says, and this is what all of her audience says, and this tells you like why she's important. The argument everyone always makes is, wait, how can she be transphobic? She's trans.
Exactly.
And it's like, and that's what Mars said, right? And obviously, like, that's clearly ridiculous. Survivorship bias is clearly a thing. That's something that we went into in depth. But that's the whole pitch of having like people from various minority backgrounds in a conservative movement. Because if you're able to get someone from that group to say the things that you want, not only is it very hard to call them bigoted, because we have this sort of implicit like identity politics inclination to not label Black people as racist or women as misogynist or trans people as transphobic. Like we have that sort of internal inclination to not do that, because like, especially if you're not of the group, right? Like if you see a Black person and they're doing racist things and you're not a Black person, like you're just like a random, white person, it's very hard to call that person Black, not only because you have to call a Black person Black, which there probably is like a lesser chance of that happening, of that, that sort of a person arising organically in the course of society. But like you might also look racist to other people who don't know us better, because like, who are you? Like the argument is effectively like, who are you to call a Black person racist, right? As a person who's not Black, right? And the same thing happens with Blair, right? Like you have a situation where people try to call her transphobic, but like she will always respond like, how can you call me transphobic? You're not even trans and I am. That's like the whole bit with them.
But see, it's like it happens all the time with people that have gone through a lot of suffering and pain and have had to deal with a lot of prejudice, and then they move up the ladder, whether it's financially, they're better off now than they were before. And all of a sudden now they're picking on the people in the lower ranks. Like Marcy says, it kills me to know that lesbians would want to exclude anyone and not be open and accepting after all we struggle in the past for our own equality. And that's what happens, and it's that self-hatred that they probably are not aware, but it's deep inside. Again, I always go into psychology because there's a lot of stuff that we deal with that we're not aware. We're still in lower levels of self-actualization and not aware of how we're doing things, because it's hidden in layers, and I think that's what we're seeing with Blair, we're seeing with Mars, we're seeing with all, what do they call them? Trans scum?
There are various terms. True scum just being like people who try to define who true trans people are. Hence the true aspect of it. Scum is pretty self-explanatory. Or trans medicalist, right? People who try to define being transgender according to strictly medical terms, which tends to tie any valid identity as being trans to partaking in said medical processes, and it tends to exclude people who are non-binary from identifying as trans, right? They tend to, and you see a couple of different ways that people run with that. Either they say, oh, they're just different but equal, which is never a valid argument, or they say, oh, well, they're just or some people just say, oh, those are the weird people, those are the SJWs, the weird leftists that everyone talks about. I'm a normal person, I'm just trying to blend into society. They are the ones that everyone hates. Hate on them, not me, right? And there's a couple other variations, but those are sort of like the main ones that you see, right?
But you were asking Mars a question about, since, and you gave him a compliment, and he didn't really respond in a very positive way to your compliment of his appearance and passability and everything. But he will be the first one to tell you that he doesn't like to really make any waves outside of everything that he does there on YouTube and everything. He'll talk about trans issues, but when he's living his life and he's living as a man, right? He's living his life. He's not really sharing everything about him. And basically, not that he has to, but he has passing privilege. So it's an irony that he would say the things that he says, knowing where he comes from. And as a former lesbian, also, it's just like, how can you do these things with like no like remorse at all, and point these fingers at a community that maybe isn't as fortunate as you. Some people in the community aren't as fortunate to pass as well or whatever. But I mean, it's just really a sad situation when people like Blair White, people like Mars, like that Fiona I was telling you about, who, says that trans women are men and makes a big theme about it, wears a t-shirt that says it. And it's like, do you think you're doing anything to help trans people, or you are actually putting them all in danger? That's the problem. They're putting us in danger.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I sort of made that argument during my debate with Mars, right? I guess, and I'll probably make a future video sort of fleshing out my view on transphobia, but I defined it as any action which has a objective, materially adverse effect on trans people by virtue of the fact that they're trans, right? Mars tried to define it, he tried to define transphobia as like calling for trans people to die. Clearly, that's not the threshold level of transphobia, right? Like, I would like to hope that that's not like the threshold before people will start calling out things and calling them transphobic, right? Because my life would be substantially worse if people did not like defend me from transphobia before that point, right? No, it's the thing is here, when we're talking about like the different people that you brought up and their worldviews, to me, this comes down to a difference between descriptive and prescriptive worldviews, right? To me, ultimately, and again, like this is sort of how, because I don't love getting into armchair psychology. Like I read a lot about it. I study political psychology when I was an undergrad. I read a lot about it. Sometimes I reference it in my videos. But here, just from an objective perspective, whatever is going on in their mind, I really tend to not care so much about. That's not my issue. If you really I feel bad for you. I feel bad for you if you want to go around and you go through the whole process of transition, but then you don't want to call yourself a trans woman or just a woman. Like, I feel bad for you, but I'm not going to tell you not to do it, right? If you want to take a descriptive worldview and just be like, hey, this is me, this is what I do, this is just how I believe that I should operate, no one else has to do this, this is just what I do, then, I mean, like, that's fine. Free country and whatnot, or free world or whatever, like, live your life. The problem for me is when people have these conceptions and they start being prescriptive with them, not only talking about what they do themselves, but how other people should live their life, and talking about how society should organize. That's where I take issue. If we want to get real philosophical, I mean, this goes back to like John Stuart Mill's harm principle, which is the idea that in any truly free society, that you should be able to do whatever you want up to the point where it inhibits someone else's ability to do the same. Right? If you really if you want to take the most self-hating worldview or self-discriminating or whatever, if you want to take that kind of worldview, then fine, go for it. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your life. The minute that you try to say that's how society should operate or that's what other people should do, that's where I take issue. When you start telling me that not only you, despite going through all the process of transition, don't identify, like you are not a woman. Once you start trying to tell me that other people who do the same things are not women either, that's where I take issue. That's where I'm going to be like, all right, absolutely not. Now we're going to go into why what you're saying is wrong from an objective standpoint, right? So,
and he seemed to be really obsessed with prison
I know.
For some reason.
Yeah.
I noticed.
Of ending up in a men's prison and being used or something.
To me, I'm like, okay.
Mark has a different
I'm like, if I
perspective.
end up, and you know, anything could happen, especially this day and age. I end up in a male prison. I'm like, I'll be king of that prison because it's like, you want this? I'm king of this. And I would have a, you know, I wouldn't be all fearful and whatever. It's like, I don't know. It's just like, it's different mindsets.
Yeah. No, I mean, go on. Sorry.
I mean, it's like his entire focus, you know, on this biology. Do we walk around life, you know, with like we do this for a reason? It's not for us to sit there and go, by the way, I'm biologically a this or a that. No, it's like we like do this to erase our past, to live our lives as a gender or sex that we're presenting as. I mean, it's easy. I mean, what do I look like? I want to walk around with a flag saying, "Hi, I'm biologically a female. I got a hoo-hoo, by the way," or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, especially we live here in very Republican Arizona.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And you know, just outing yourself to everyone in our, you know, neighborhood would, trust me, would not be a good thing. It just wouldn't. So we literally don't make a big deal about it. We don't like live like waving our trans flag because it's not really what defines us. What defines us is who we know that we are, and we live our lives accordingly.
And it's like feminists or radical feminists are okay with trans people as long as they know their biology. Have you noticed that? As long as you admit your biology, you're cool with us. It's like, what is that?
Except, I mean, like, the thing is, it's never just that, right? Like, so Mars wanted to posit, like, that was an argument that he made during the debate, right? Like, he wanted to posit it as, oh, it's just a difference of opinion, right? Like, I'm allowed to believe what I do, and you're allowed to believe what you do, and we can go about believing our beliefs, and everyone can be just fine, and, you know, that's all good and dandy. But the problem with that is when one of those people is believing something which naturally and conclusively calls for the mistreatment of another group of people on a categorical basis, right? Like, again, and I spelled this out very, 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 very clearly, right? A TERF, if you break it down, is a trans exclusionary radical feminist, right? When you're making a TERF argument, and mind you, like, I'm not just going off the fact that, you know, she, like, Ariel Scarcella identifies as TERF, like, she made the arguments, right, that there are certain spaces either in feminism discussion or feminist discussions or in, like, tangible women's spaces where trans women primarily should be excluded from on a categorical basis, right? And when you're doing this, it's not just a difference in opinion, right? Because not only is what you're saying wrong on the basis that you're presenting it, right? Like, the arguments that she gave to justify it are just materially wrong, but also it's the fact that you are calling for something which is materially the mistreatment of another group of people. So we can't just sit here and be like, oh yeah, let's just have a difference of opinion and have it all be fine, because one person is calling for hate speech and the other is not, right? Like, it's like, that's why I brought up the Nazis, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, you know, like, by that logic, you know, a Nazi can go around saying that we should kill all the Jews, and I can't criticize that person because it's just a difference of opinion, people. Come on. Like, you can't criticize me for exercising my free speech. And it's always funny to me because, like, people, especially like conservatives, will constantly misuse this idea of free speech or the free marketplace of ideas, when in fact, if you actually dig into it, what it really calls for, at least like our legal system's interpretation of that principle, is that when you have free speech or someone going around touting out free speech, then the common remedy is to have the public like pile drive on that person to point out why that hate speech is in fact hate speech, why it's wrong, and why we should disavow that person. Right. So it's always just so remarkable to me when I see these people being like, hey, why is everyone criticizing me? Hey, why is everyone being so mean to me just for saying that we should treat trans women materially differently? Like, this is just my opinion. It's like, it's just your opinion, but your opinion is to treat them differently and negatively because they're trans.
It's hurting people. And let's get into trans women in sports, where you spoke to him about that and brought some really good evidence to the table, but he wouldn't see it.
A meta-analysis.
I mean, he's just like he's so blinded, by what the rat femmes tell him and what his lesbian friends tell him and whatever else, and he can't see anything else. He's like denying science, although he's trying to use science to say that we are biologically this or that. And if you could go into some of those analysis and some of the stuff that you spoke
I guess he's
him,
cracking open his 5th grade biology book.
Like he told him, we learned about Columbus, in the history we were in the 5th grade. And it's like, they lied to us about Columbus. Right. So, things have evolved, things have changed, science keeps growing daily, but they're like, nope, we ain't gonna take it.
Quantum physics don't exist.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm more than willing to send you, I'm pulling up the study right now. When I prepared to go on debate, I had an entire sort of outline of different sources and different research that I had conducted, right? And so when we're talking about, let's see.
Or before you do that, I wanted to acknowledge.
Yeah, go for it.
She says, or he, I'm not quite sure if they're trans or what. Perpetual annoyance says, is it possible to avoid using the specific words describing the bigotry, ist, phobic, in certain contexts to ask the person what they think the effect of their rhetoric is?
Is it possible to avoid using specific words?
Yeah, I didn't understand it either. I was going,
to ask the person what they think the effect of their rhetoric is. I mean, yeah. Like I would say so, right? So, for example, right, when we're talking about whether or not someone is being, I don't know, the first ist that's coming to my mind is ableist, because I recently did some videos on this, right? Like, ableism has an objective definition, right? Whether or not, now people will define it differently, but let's just define it vaguely as like talking or saying things which are objectively negative about people who are disabled, or calling for the negative treatment of people who are disabled by virtue of the fact that they are disabled, right? Like you can talk about, like you can present evidence that people are being ableist without going out and saying that they're ableist, right? And you can do that by providing examples, right? And that's sort of what I did, right? Like before I asked all the questions about whether or not she was being transphobic or wrong or whatever, right? Like I've just presented evidence to every effect, right? Like I talked about specific examples. I talked about studies that disprove the things that she said. And all of these things are evidence where I technically at the end of it don't even need to ask the question of, so you agree with me that she's transphobic, right? Because at that point, like it's already like to an audience that is reasonably paying attention, the message is already clear, right? The message is already clear. And I technically, like I didn't ask him, I more asked it like, again, like I asked it more so I could try to see if he would fight me on it, right? To see if he would end up fighting me. And every opportunity he did, right? And every opportunity he did, which sort of...
He would get very annoyed. He was like, why are you making me repeat myself? What it's like, but he's not even...
Well, I mean, he never answered any of my questions the entire time.
Yeah, he went around it and he pretended like he had already said something definitive where he never made any definitive statement.
He was not clear at all. And obviously you wouldn't have not continued to ask him, because I saw some people say that you were repetitive. I didn't think so. I mean, I'm the same way. I will ask something till I'm blue in the face until you give me an answer. And if I feel you haven't given me an answer, I'm going to ask it maybe in a different way. And so he was just getting annoyed by it. Because he was running away from the question and he didn't know how to answer it. It's,
Yeah. So this is actually very interesting because, I mean, so when I was in mock trial, and this is actually like a very basic thing that you learn to do whenever you're dealing with a witness that isn't being cooperative or isn't answering your question, right? What you do is eventually you start asking questions which have very clearly, very specific yes or no answers, right? Like questions which after you have gone, like because of where you're at logically in the discussion, it naturally invites a yes or no answer. Right. And the reason why these are very effective questions and the reason why I use them throughout the debate and the reason why they're helpful is because it can sort of set off an alarm whenever the person that you're asking the question to says anything to you except for yes or no. Because if they do, that's telling you that they're going off and they're saying either something which does not respond to your question or is just something completely different, that they're just trying to avoid it entirely. And so I'm able to sit there and be like, okay, like, he'll go off and he'll give his explanation, he'll give his response and yada, yada. But at the end of it, I'll just be like, okay, you talked about X, but I asked about Y and Z. So let's return to that. tell me why, Y and Z, or tell me your opinion on Y or Z, or give me yes or no to these facts, right? Like I can always use that as a way to rein things in when he tries to run away, right? And that's what happened the entire time, right? And that's why people think that that's why people may think that it sounded repetitive, because every single time I asked a question, it would take another 5 or 6 times to actually get some semblance of an answer out of him. And that was like after, again, like that. And then again, like that's after making every reasonable effort to work with the kid. But that's, if he doesn't want to answer the question, then I'm not just going to let him run away on it.
Can you send me something? Let me go ahead and see here.
Yeah, that was just the study that you asked for.
Okay.
Just a short blurb on, that's a 2017 meta-analysis by Sports Medicine, which conducted, it was a meta-analysis covering all prior research on trans individuals' performance in sports and pre-existing sports policies concerning trans people, right? That's exactly what I referenced in the document. The study showed that there is, it was sort of a twofold showing. It first showed that that there's no evidence currently that indicating transgender women have an unfair athletic advantage at any stage of their transition. And secondly, that most sports policies are not evidence-based and that trans individuals experience substantial discrimination from sports institutions, right? And yeah, it was a little frustrating because, this is another example. There were examples of this throughout the entire discussion, but this was a pretty primary example of where he says something, like he holds an opinion. I'm like, well, here are some facts to disprove that opinion. And he just throws up his arms and says, well, I'm not going to believe it. Yeah. And there's really nothing I can do there except for ask him, okay, well, what other basis do you have for not believing it? Do you have another study? No. Do you have any professional background? No. Do you have a degree? No. Well, then why aren't you believing it? Is it just because you don't want to? Because that's certainly what it looks like. Yeah. Right?
He would probably tell you, well, I look at my shoulders and I look at, and you're
he did say.
And you're like, that is the difference biologically between humans.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All humans have different physical characteristics. There are tall women, short women, fat women, skinny women, tall men, skinny, fat men, skinny men.
Yeah.
It's like
it has nothing to do
it
with
doesn't have
the fact that if you have what your genitals are. Absolutely nothing. Because, I've seen some guys. I'm 5'5". I'm not very tall, but I've seen some guys shorter than me. I've seen some guys that are much weaker looking than me. And I've seen some guys that could probably stomp me, with their foot. But it's a difference of individuality. It has absolutely nothing to do with the lack or presence of testosterone. We've done shows about that and really dwelled in deeply in this whole trans athletes. And, they don't have anything to stand on. They just go with the really mean ways of doing it, trying to make fun of a trans woman because of their hand size or whatever size. And it's like, you can't go there because there are women that have big hands, just like there are men that have small hands.
So what are they advocating? To misgender every woman with big hands? Because that's what they're basically shooting for, where there are regular cis women out there that get misgendered all the time because all of this transphobia and hatred is being stirred up by none other than the people who transition themselves. And it's mind-boggling.
It is. And it's dangerous for everyone, because if you have a woman who is like 5'11", 6 foot basketball player, all of a sudden goes to the bathroom and she's been taking a little bit of steroids or whatever, they're going to pick on her because now they've made such this spotlight on trans individuals that she might be subject to a hate crime.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there are, and we can go on, and there's tons of issues with having these sorts of sports policies, especially they may have been fine, 10, 15, some odd years ago, when being trans, especially in high school or in sports, was not as big of an issue. When I was in high school, right, I was terrified of coming out, and I was terrified of being visibly trans because I came from a semi-conservative small town where I had a very strong suspicion that I would not be received well, right? And so I went through, and, I played sports, and I went through all the different, I was captain of the football and the track team. I was the homeschool hero. Hooray. Still dealing with, still interesting dealing with that since coming out. But it's a very different time, right? Like now we have kids who are coming out in high school, and we have kids who are comfortable enough being visible and being seen as a trans person during, this early part of their life, right? And so when we're talking about these old sports policies, like they just don't work anymore. Like we are very rapidly approaching a society which has grown past these old, like the old way of operating, right? It's kind of like it's like a society eventually growing out of its training wheels, right? Like eventually get to a point where it just doesn't need them anymore. Or if we want to make a different analogy, right? I don't know what the name of the first Apple computer is, but it's as if you got the first Apple computer that Apple ever came out with, and you're still using it today after all of the changes in society. It just does not work for what life demands of us right now, right? I think that there could have been a larger discussion on like different alternatives, because I think that's where we could have gone if it was a better faith discussion. I always like entertaining those sorts of ideas, like something I've always thought about, and this is something I would really like for researchers to look into, is maybe the possibility of doing what wrestlers do and introducing just like genderless weight classes for everyone, right? Because I remember when I was in football, right? Like I was an offensive tackle. I was not as big as a lot of the other kids who are on the line, and I had to go up against people 2 or 3 times my size. Now, would you say that I was at a biological disadvantage by those between the two of us? Probably. But is it because of sex? No, it's because that person is just substantively a bigger person than I am. And I think that's a lot of what a lot of these people will point at as a justification for having sex segregated or biological sex segregated sports, when you could resolve that same issue if we're actually having a good faith discussion in a number of different ways, right? So I think that there's a place where we could resolve that issue. But if we keep trying to double down on something which is just at the end of the day not scientific, we're only going to end up prejudicing against people who don't deserve it.
Exactly. And they don't realize that a lot has changed in science and biology. It's not the same like 30, 40 years ago. There's a lot of new findings, and what they thought before is no longer holds any weight at all. Things have changed. So they're still using the old paradigm, and there's a brand new paradigm right now. Mm-hmm. And they need to start opening their eyes to that new paradigm.
But there's a reason that the old paradigm is still in play. Just like we have big oil running the world still, just like we have, we don't have clean energy yet, all of these things. It's because the powers that be profit from those types of systems being in effect and controlling the world that we live in. So the gender caste system, the social class system, is what benefits these people,
Yeah, and I totally agree, right? It's a hard system, because right now, especially with the coronavirus, I think that, and again, I can hear a little bit of feedback, but right now as a society, we're sort of going through a lot of growing pains, right? Like a lot of people are realizing collectively that there are a lot of things wrong with how we run society, whether it's how we run things, in such a way which disproportionately and negatively affect people of lower incomes or of certain minority backgrounds, or how we disproportionately benefit other people in society by virtue of the fact that they come from generational wealth. Like there's so many different issues that we have, which we're just sort of now starting to realize are wrong. And it's hard because, like, if you don't come from one of these backgrounds, or you haven't come from one of these backgrounds, and you've just started to experience these sort of issues, like, for example, with me, right? Like, I've always known that I'm trans, but it's like I would be lying if I said that I was not a substantively different person now, compared to before I came out and sort of lived as a trans person and lived with the way that society treats me, right? Like I've grown a lot, and I've learned a lot more about like what's like some of the problems with society. And so people are now just starting to realize a lot of the problems that come with the way that we structure society. And that takes time to get over and time to adjust, right? But it's happening. It's a lot at once. It's a lot at once.
So Perpetual says, hell, aren't cis women kicked from sport programs for small bio differences like castersemania? Yeah, and I think that's why the Olympics has like changed the way they look at things, because they realize that they can't do that anymore. That there's, there are women that just have a little more genetically have more testosterone, or their chromosome alignments are different. We're still learning. We're like babies on this whole quest of learning the human brain and the human body and how things react.
I mean, you
know?
can't compare a Kenyan runner to someone, from the United States, because Kenyans run barefoot, they run in higher altitudes, they have a greater lung capacity. It's not because they're more male-ish, it's because biologically they just are designed differently. So maybe they do have certain advantages, but athletics is always going to have these differences. And we have basketball players that can run circles around the big guys, but they all have their place. The variances between sexes are actually tiny, but social enforcement is huge.
It is very, very huge.
No, and I mean, I tend to agree with that, right? And that's sort of what the science is showing us at this point, is that we are at a point where we're sort of realizing that, like, are there differences between people? Absolutely. But, like, everyone is built differently. And that when we're talking about how things like, quote unquote, biological sex factor into things like being able to compete against other people in sports, really, we're talking about extremely minor differences compared to other kinds of differences which just exist between everyone, regardless of things like biological sex.
And we go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the magic, elixir for like competitive advantage is testosterone, right? They say that's like the holy grail, right? But Mark can tell you from his years as a professional bodybuilder that was not necessarily the case, right? Pre-transition, what was it like for you?
Well,
when you started, and then afterwards, as you developed and you became a trans man, did you feel stronger as a man with, the things that you were doing?
No, because I mean, prior to transition, I did, a lot of stuff to improve myself in the sport. But, testosterone doesn't give you an advantage. People think that because you have testosterone, you're going to be superhuman. You have to eat right. You have to sleep right. You have to train hard. Testosterone is just a sex hormone that might give a little bit of benefit, but it's not the entire end all of the outcome, and it's just crazy. The whole thing is, we transition for a reason. We don't transition to continue to have that label trans behind us. I mean, there's a trans history. Once you transition, and transition to me is like you get from point A to point B. Once you're in point B, that's it. That's put behind you. You don't sit there and go, oh, by the way, I'm trans. Oh, by the way, I'm trans. Oh, by the way, I was born biologically this. It doesn't, I mean, what does that serve? And so that's all these true scum, whatever they're called, focus on. And what they're doing is just creating problems, feeding the fire, the fuel for people to hate us, which serves nothing,
Yeah, no, and I mean, I completely get that. And this sort of goes back to, again, like there's sort of two different narratives as about, like, to why people talk about this to the extent that they do. Something else I always see, especially among people like TransBruh or like Blair White or whoever, right? Like that category of, trans creator, right? Is that they always tend to pull out, like, they don't actually have any substantive studies behind them, but what they will cite as evidence are like specific, unique instances where there's one person that does something that they'll try to say is like a gotcha. It like proves their point, right? Like this was the whole Jessica Yaniv bit, right? Oh, yeah. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jessica Yaniv, but like everyone, like Rose of Dawn, Blair White, all like everyone covered this person to death, right? And that's because like you had this person who seemed to be the poster child of everything that conservatives say is wrong with trans people, especially trans women, right? And it's always just interesting to me because I cannot tell if they are using this person as a way to justify things they themselves believe or to feed into an audience which may be beneficial to them financially. Again, that goes back to the discussion we had earlier. But the thing is, like, talking from an evidence perspective, and actually there's someone else, a creator named Corviday, who made a really good video talking about like this exact thing, right? What this does is it's not so much evidence as it's feeding into a straw man that's existed in our society forever, like going back to the 50s, where who was the first really the extremely famous trans person who transitioned like during the mid to late 50s. I cannot remember her name, but like effectively what happened with her, she was like one of the first famous trans people, and at first, like, she was a national icon, right? Everyone loved her to death. Everyone thought that she was the greatest thing ever. But once people realized that she sort of challenged societal norms, specifically the norm that if you're born a certain way, that's the way that you are forever until the end of time, people began to characterize her as like a sexual deviant and as a molester and as this terrible person, right? And that's sort of a trope that's existed in our society forever. And now that trans people are becoming more visible, the people who have had that sort of straw man, that sort of picture in their mind, want to double down on it every single opportunity that they can. And Jessica Yaniv was sort of the fuel to that fire, right? Like the fire was dying down, but you know, you're able to find this one person that matches it almost to a T, and everyone is going to talk about it, even if, you know, there might be another completely reasonable explanation why this person acts the way that they do. Like maybe they're just an honest to goodness sex pervert, and that being trans has nothing to do with it, you know? Maybe that's the explanation. But no, they want to be able to use this person in similar examples of like very specific instances to say, oh yeah, this is the way that all of these people who will look like this or whatever, all these trans women who are not me because I pass and I'm pretty, I guess, talking about Blair White.
Right.
This is the way that all of them act. I don't have any studies to say it, but here's an example that shows it's possible. And because it's possible, that must mean it's probable. And of course, like there are so many logical fallacies with that, but that's what they do, right?
You gotta ask yourself, why do they do these things? What are they gaining from it? What is it that makes their life any better, or the lives of trans people around them any better, to focus on the few bad apples that are in every group of people that exist on the planet? I mean,
is their way of dealing with who they are and what they've done, and they may not be okay with it. And so by like, it's almost like a narc, you know, that you could be like in a witness protection program, or be, you know, somebody who's in jail and they pull you out so you could be a spy, that kind of thing, so that you, it's some sort of weird psychological thing going on when they do that.
Yeah.
I mean, money might be some of the reasons, but I don't think, you know, that money is the only reason there.
So if we want to take the most charitable interpretation, right? If we're just, again, this is like pure armchair psychology. You don't have to ascribe any weight to this. But if we're taking the most charitable interpretation and assuming these people to be like good faith actors, right? I mean, the way that I see it, I mean, if you look at all of them, like the constant for all of them is that they pass really well. And they have, whether or not, like I specifically went out of my way to not use this word with Mars because I thought that I knew that if I used it, he was going to make a big deal over it. But like these people do all have passing privilege, right? And when you are in such a position where you are associated with a group that is largely disliked in society, but in your day-to-day life, you're able to draw a distinction between them, particularly in the aspect that the average person does not associate you with that group. It gives you an incentive to be able to, it gives you an incentive to try and draw a distinction between you being, I suppose, what you would see as like a normal person, and the other people, the group of people that you think that society is quote unquote hating or disagreeing with or whatever. And so it gives you an incentive to try and paint the other people, the other, whoever the other is being defined as a categorical difference, or as a categorical other, as someone, as the true people to be despised, right? Don't hate on me. I'm just an honest to goodness transsexual. I'm just the same as all of you. The people you should hate though are those trans activists who are trying to get you to believe in fake genders, and who are trying to get you to like women penis, even though none of them say that, and even though none of them make up 95 genders or whatever have you, right? Those are the people you should hate, not me. Hate them. I am just a normal person. Please love me. Right? Like that's how it always
gives them a sense of like, I'm okay, right? I'm not like these other people. I'm okay. You know, that kind of, again, it's like dealing with your own demons, or trying to justify what you've done, even though you're still battling with it, but you're like, okay, but I don't do what these other people do. I'm okay in their minds. That's how.
But it's great to be able to come together in good faith as you had asked him,
Mm-hmm.
but he was refusing to even come in good faith. He
Yeah.
came in, his question was, what is a woman? And it was
Yeah.
like, so he just throws the
Just getting right in there. Yeah, getting right into it.
big ace out there and stuff. And it's like, well, we'll get to that, but let's dissect this a little bit. I mean, eventually we're gonna come to that, but no, he just wanted to kind of make his constituents happy, right?
Yeah.
Those people that watch him, those people on Twitter that support him, those people that are, TERFs and others that, transmedicalists and, a lot of the rad femmes and everything, and gender critical people that come out in droves to support those types of people, it's like they don't realize that they are nothing different than you and I.
Yeah.
They are the same as us.
Yeah.
And those people that are supporting them are only doing so because we were part of the rad femmes and we did some things for them and stuff. But as long as you're doing their bidding, they're going to give you your pronouns. They're going to be nice to you. They're going to be sweet.
Yeah.
But the moment you change your opinion in any way, shape, or form, that's when it's all off. The marriage is over.
Yeah, the moment you're like, wait a minute, I'm not going to be this trans thing forever. I'm a man. I don't need to continue with that trans title. Oh, no, you're not a man. You're a woman. And they think of it like pretending to be a man, that kind of thing. And it's like, really? Is that what you see me as?
Yeah. No, and I completely agree with you. And I think that you see, actually, it's so interesting because there's been a lot of discussion in the community about this recently, right? I'll get to this quickly so that you can read that. But there was recently a video put out by Philosophy Tube about like content creators and their fandoms, right? And it essentially talked about the fact that there are a lot of right-wing creators, especially after the Sandy Hook shooting, that went to him and talked about the fact that they felt like they had some blood on their hands, that they wanted to get out of what they were doing because they felt like they'd been implicated, that what they had done, like by having the platforms they had in some way contributed to that, to the Sandy Hook shooting and to people dying, right? But the thing is, it's actually kind of tragic because those people can't give up their platforms because now they have an audience with certain expectations, right? Now you have built a platform to yourself. It's not like you can just change because you might have a pecuniary interest. Maybe that's where you get your income from. Maybe that's what you and your family depend on, right? Like once you dig yourself into such a hole, you're kind of stuck to whatever your platform is, right? And this can work for either people. I recently talked about how this affected another YouTuber called Xander Hall. A lot of people were, bringing him under fire for calling him bigoted or transphobic or ableist or whatever. And I made the same point in the inverse there. Even if he, I can't read his mind. I can only go off what he does and says to me. But even in the world where he actually is transphobic and ableist, he has built a platform where there's an expectation for him to do the literal opposite. So even if one day he pulls his mask off and is like, haha, I'm actually transphobic and ableist, I have fooled you all, he's going to lose his entire pecuniary, he's going to lose his income, he's going to lose his job, and he's going to be shamed forever, right? And then he can't really do anything with that, right? So when you're talking about Mars and other people who are transphobic, maybe they believe something else, but they are married to their platform and they have to defend it no matter what. Right?
Exactly. So Marcy says,
my opinion is the trans people who are transphobic are trying to get people to focus on other trans people, saying, hey, pick on them, not me, to keep themselves accepted while harming the community.
Very true.
Yeah. Basically said it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly the way I would put it, if not better.
Yeah.
Definitely. Go on.
It's bizarre because it's like the whole political system. I've always said both wings belong to the same bird. They keep us fighting one another, but there's an agenda behind it all. And the bottom line is to control us. It's like the way we're seeing the world turn right now. You have to be blind not to understand where we're heading with all of this. Life is not ever going to be the same. It's pretty scary. Yeah. But you've got Democrats fighting the Republicans, and people are just literally wanting to shoot at each other. And it's like, are you people dense? They work for the same shadow government and the same elitists. You know, it's who they all get money from the same place. They pretend to be enemies with one another, but what they want is for us to. I mean, I believe that true hardly, because it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you
No,
know,
and I mean, like, or sorry, go on, go on.
we've had Republicans and Democrat presidents through our entire. Has anything ever changed? I mean,
I would no, and I definitely and I agree with you, right? Like what we have right now, as far as like, well, you have a Republican Party that's very clearly like fiscally and socially conservative, right? I mean, if not bordering on fascist, re our president. But then
Yes.
you also have from the Democratic Party. I mean, you have a party which markets itself as sort of the socially progressive, the socially inclusive, you know, the better party, the more hip and new party that's willing to fight the problems that our current system has. But just about all of the major politicians, right? Especially like Joe Biden is a wonderful example. Like his interests are not so much aligned with what he says to, right? Like his interests are corporate ones, right? Like he receives the majority of his financial aid of his the funding for his campaign and for his interest from like corporate sources, right? Like that's who pays him. That's who controls what he says, right? The same thing was true, especially for like Pete Buttigieg. And that's the reason why a lot of people criticized him, was because there was a lot of concern about, hey, Pete, where are you getting all this oodles of cash from? And he would never tell anyone. And then like when he would have quote unquote private events for like corporate sponsors, I can't remember the price tag. I think it was like thousands of dollars for a ticket into the place, right? Like it's clearly telling you, okay, clearly you're getting your money from corporate interests, right? And that's true for the majority of the party. I mean, like another example, and you know, I won't bring up any more after this, we can move on, but like Elizabeth Warren, right? Who originally went into the race with a lot of very progressive policies, basically marketed herself as like the female Bernie, right? I have all the same policies as he does, but I'm also a woman and I have plans because I am very prophetic and I know what to do. And if you elect me in, I'll know what to do. But then it turns out, you know, when she comes under scrutiny or when, you know, you start to turn up the temperature a little bit, that because she found it to be beneficial, again, there's like an actual debate about whether or not it was beneficial to her. I don't think that it was in the long run, but she saw it beneficial to sort of abandon those policies and take a more centrist platform. Because at the end of the day, even though she said that she was a progressive, she was an establishment Democrat and she had establishment interests, right? Really the only person who was running in the race to begin with who didn't have establishment interests was Bernie Sanders, right? And we came very close. We came very close to getting him in, even though, you know, there's a whole nother discussion about how effective he would have been in office. That's another discussion. But like, he almost got in, but he didn't. And now we have someone who's going to go in, and his whole platform is, I'm not going to change anything, right? Like, that's literally what he said. Like, Biden has gone on the record to say, I don't want to change anything. Things will stay substantively the same. And it's hard to look at that and to really get excited about it, right? It makes me very troubled on the prospects of whether or not we'll get a Biden presidency, because mind you, it's not like I think that Biden is a good person in the slightest. I have plenty of objections to him personally, but do I prefer him to another 4 years of Trump who just got through impeachment, and so he knows that impeachment isn't something he has to worry about. Trump, who has gone on the record to say that he wants to try and change the definition of transgender and make sure that people are only recognized under law according to quote unquote immutable biological sex. Trump, who's behind the whole border wall and the travel ban, and we can go on and on and on. And Trump, who thinks that you can get rid of the coronavirus by putting fucking bleach into your veins.
I know.
Inside human beings.
Yeah,
do you think that I want this man for another 4 years? No. And that
crazy.
no, like every single opportunity we should work to try and get him out of office. But it's hard. It's very hard when you have a candidate now that you're sort of stuck to, because thanks Democratic establishment. But it's hard when you have a candidate who literally their entire platform is, I'm not going to change anything when I get in there. Things won't get any worse, but I won't make them any better. Right?
Well,
it's hard.
The pockets are being aligned. I mean, this is all about lobbyists. It's all about corporations. They really don't care about the people. We are just a means to an end, you know, and they use us. But in the end, it's just, to me, this whole corporation capitalist, it's turning into something of this globalness that they're trying to create. And we're still holding on for dear life, but I don't know. I don't know what the
Yeah.
future holds. It's pretty mind blowing.
Yeah, no, I mean, like it is sort of scary. And that's, again, going back to our discussion earlier, right now we are sort of experiencing this point in development where we as a society, we are collectively realizing the problems that exist, right? Like we realize these economic systematic disparities between like classes and people from different minority backgrounds and people from different like ethnic or gender or sexual orientation or whatever kind of background, right? Like we recognize this, we recognize that we are existing in an economy where the majority, like the vast majority of wealth is owned by a disproportionately small number of people in society. We understand that we live in a society where it's terrible that our healthcare is tied to our being employed, because now that we're experiencing a point in time where like over 20% of us are unemployed, it's becoming really apparent why that kind of system is wrong. Like we're realizing a lot of these things, but it's all coming at such a fast point, or at such a, it's kind of like all the shit's hitting the fan at once, right? Like it's not just like it's the entire bucket is just hitting the fan at once, and it just knocks over the fan, and now there's just shit everywhere, which is a wonderful analogy, but unfortunately pretty fitting. And now we gotta clean it up, and it's kind of figuring out when people are gonna actually start, because a lot of people still don't know like what we should do. A lot of people don't know what the solution is, but figuring out the solution, I mean, like, what the solution will be to all the problems that we have, all the problems that we're experiencing. Like, it's cool that we're realizing it. Do I know what all the solutions will be? Can I prophesize that? No, not entirely. I have general ideas, as do most people. But the important thing is that we start actually having a discussion about it, and that we make sure that we don't end up taking a step back in the process.
I mean, I think that, we were listening to what the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, had to say about the homeless situation in California, and how they were partnering with Motel 6, and they were figuring out a plan in order to get these people what they need in their time of need and stuff, and to try to rehabilitate them and help them instead of ignoring the problem. We came from, Portland, Oregon, where the homeless situation is unbelievably bad. I mean, tents in every location that you could think of, on private property, on public land, in a park. I mean, and they had no real response to it. And I think now with what's happened with the pandemic, it's forced people to really take a good look at what these social structures have done, and how social classes are made and affected, and people groups and people that have hit hard times or are doing things that, aren't beneficial to them. I mean, how can we help? How can we change the world to be a better place? How can we help our fellow human? I think that's really super important, that we would understand that we have responsibility as humans to take care of each other. And I know that I was raised, in a very Republican, conservative, ultra Christian background. And, it was always like, God helps those who helps themselves. If you don't eat, if you don't work, you don't eat, and all that. And it's like,
pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
Yeah, that doesn't solve anything. I mean, nothing.
Yeah.
I know you have to go shortly, so in a nutshell, what would you like to say to those individuals that are doing what they're doing against those of us that just want to live our lives? We don't want to carry around the trans label. We just want to be normal, which is what we are. Just what would you?
Yeah. So I'll sort of reiterate what I said earlier, right? Fundamentally, and this is sort of the interesting thing, right? Because when you're talking about this rhetoric of, oh, we're allowed to just have a difference of opinion, or, oh, we should just be allowed to express our opinions impartially and differently, right? There is a certain extent that I want to agree with you. There is a certain extent to where I do want to believe that we can just coexist and have a difference of beliefs, and that, you can go on believing what you do and I can go on believing what I do, and that everything can just be fine, right? Like, I want to believe that, and I want to believe that you're approaching that in good faith. But when you're talking about not only trying to discuss your position, but discussing it on a large platform such as, you know, the ones that people have on YouTube or even on something like Twitter or something like that, and then B, departing from just a descriptive mindset or a descriptive position of how you view yourself into a prescriptive one, talking about how other people should live their lives and how society should regard the lives of other people. That's where I take issue, right? And once you start going out of, you know, oh, this is just how I regard myself, and you start getting into this is how society should regard other people, now what you're doing is you're engaging in transphobic behavior. When you are saying to society that we should treat trans people categorically in very specific and negative ways, that's transphobic. That's crossing the line. If you want to believe what you do, that's fine, but don't say that's how we should treat other people. That's all.
I wanted to I have to address this.
Oh God.
Brianna thinks that Trump is doing trying to take care of the American people and fighting to keep our economy strong.
He's fighting for the corporate interests.
I know.
That's for sure. The billions of airline dollars that are going.
I know.
Yeah, that's for sure. But I mean, as far as the American people, the man could care less.
Yeah, it's like he has no business holding that position. The man.
So yeah. I mean, like if we want to be very specific and we want to be very logistic, literally all that the Trump administration has done to help the average person going through this is to give people a $1,200 stimulus check. That is less than almost every other country in the entire world. So even if you're talking about like giving some help to people, most people, especially people who are living in poverty, do not have enough money to get through day-to-day necessities, especially working class people who have lost a lot of their jobs. And then beyond that, we have like we right now have some of the highest recorded numbers of cases and deaths of the coronavirus out of the entire world, right? The entire world, right? An administration like the Trump administration couldn't have handled this any more poorly. And people want to say that he's helping the economy and helping us. No, there are so many things that we could have done better at the onset. There are so many things that we could have done better, but that we didn't. That's a whole nother discussion though. But I mean, like throw us, like, this is not a hard thing to stumble on. Throw a stone and just like the evidence is literally everywhere. Like people have talked about this to death here on YouTube.
Yeah.
Right.
I think he's done some sort of like witchcraft or sorcery on people because I can't understand how people defend a man who has an IQ this small. Literally, I mean, when he speaks, his vocabulary is very limited. He uses the word incredible, beautiful. I mean, it's like, and this man's a president.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is a whole nother discussion. Maybe we can have it another time. But
I know you have to go. But thank you so much. It's been great as always.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on, Mark, Lynna. It's been wonderful talking to you. The same. Wonderful talking to you as always. And I'd love to do it again sometime. So take care, please. Wash your hands, social distancing, and all that. And be well.
Take care.
Okay.
Have a good one. Happy
Bye.
Friday. Bye. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next Tuesday again.
Same time.
Same time.
Channel.
We'll be going into a lot of more spiritual stuff, a lot of interesting stuff that you have found. Brianna says more stimulus is coming though.
More stimulus. The $1,200 check is supposed to carry us for 10
weeks, according to that
Steve Mnuchin, the financial guy.
But do you know how much money they have actually given to the airlines and to
corporations have made $243 billion.
And they're like
of this
constantly bailing themselves out, while they give us scraps, and tax us to death and do all sorts of stuff. I mean,
$1,200 is one of their steak dinners.
Yeah.
In one evening.
Yeah. These people,
they don't care about us. I mean, they throw us a little bone basically to keep us like, see, we did something. But if you compare it to what Spain is doing, people, what different countries, Great Britain and things, let's look at what they're doing for their people. For the Canadians, what they're doing for their people. It's nothing, believe me.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, for your chat and your interactions. But be well, be safe, have a great weekend as best as you could have. We're still in lockdown and things are not back to normal. If it'll ever get back to normal. It's like today we went shopping and they had removed all the bin stuff.
Oh, I know.
So I'm
all
thinking,
the dry goods and stuff, you can't really get them.
Yeah, I wonder
no
if
old
that'll,
brand. No.
if that'll ever go back
What's
to normal.
going to happen to a buffet restaurant? Are we gonna be able to go to Sweet Tomatoes anymore? Or do you want to?
No, imagine touching.
Thinking tongs.
Yeah, and then somebody else touches them.
somebody's-
They went on and on.
yeah,
And no. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Take care. We love you. But remember to always love yourselves too. Bye-bye.